Welcome into Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson, in for Dave Bacon. Later on in the show, we're going to be joined by Chris Easterling of the Akron Beacon Journal, and soon we're going to be joined by Spencer German of 92.3 The Fan. But we start with ESPN as Deshaun Watson. We're still waiting on news of how long that suspension could possibly be regarding the Brown signal caller, but in his stead is backup quarterback Jacoby Brissett. On ESPN, Chris Canty had this to say about the Brown signal caller and how comfortable he is leading the Browns roster.
The beginning of the schedule for the Cleveland Browns, it's not exactly murderer's row. They're on the road against the Carolina Panthers, the New York Jets at home, the Pittsburgh Steelers at home, who are probably going to be breaking in a young quarterback, the Atlanta Falcons on the road. So you have to think that they have the potential to go 2-2 with the strength of that roster. And then you're looking at dates on the schedule with the Houston Texans, the New Orleans Saints, the Commanders, and the Miami Dolphins. So I just look at this as a situation where you could be talking about the Cleveland Browns finding a way to get to 8 or 9 wins, even with Jacoby Brissett as their starting quarterback for the entirety of 2022.
Wow, I think that's asking a lot of Jacoby Brissett. I think it's asking a lot of Jacoby Brissett.
Well, I don't know that offense is asking a lot of Jacoby Brissett. You have one of the best offensive lines. You have arguably one of the best 1-2 punches at the running back spot. You've got some weapons in your skill position core, and you've got a top-flight defense. I don't know that Jacoby Brissett has to go out there and be a world beater. He has to just give you competent quarterback
You have
play.
to be able to. You have to have him be something that they have to respect on defense, at least.
And he is that. He is that. He's a guy that you have to respect. He's going to make the right reads. He's going to throw the ball in the right place. There's no question about that. He will give you that. Does he have the arm talent to wow anybody? No. But he can throw the ball down the field with accuracy, and Jacoby Brissett can make winning plays. I'm not saying he's going to be the difference in them winning games or losing games. I just think Jacoby Brissett is going to be that steady hand with the offense and doing exactly what Kevin Stefanski wants him to do.
And I think that's the bigger point that needs to be talked about here. Again, you have Jacoby Brissett, who has led an Indianapolis Colts team. He's led them far down in the season, led them to a winning season as well. And then also, he's somebody who's been around the league, understands what he's seeing. And so I don't necessarily think that the expectations need to be as high as some people are saying. He just needs to be that steadying hand. And in order to talk about that, we bring in Spencer German of 92.3 The Fan. And Spencer, I know that, we've talked about, Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett, but at the same time, it feels like the expectations for Jacoby Brissett are pretty dang high, at least especially given the fact that he's meant to be a spot starter realistically for Watson in his stead.
Yeah, Mac, and we know Mary Kay Cabot sort of floated out there at cleveland.com that the Browns signed Brissett with the intention of, well, we think he would play maybe a quarter of the season. So that's kind of, I think they kind of expected, like, yeah, we'll have him for part of the season and we think we can win some games. I don't think Chris Canty's that far off. If he did play the whole season, I think 8 wins at least is realistic. Maybe you could get to 9. Playoffs, I think, is a little bit of a stretch if we're having this conversation. But I think the bigger thing here is just basically asking, because I think we all assume at this point, I know it's all assumptions, we're all just guessing. We all, I think, we've all kind of whittled it down at this point to understand Deshaun Watson's probably playing at some point this season. So I think the bigger question is, how many wins do they need from Jacoby Brissett during the stretch that Deshaun Watson's not playing to get into the playoffs? If you want to have that conversation about how he can keep them afloat for the whole season, if the suspension is that large, I get that. But I do think like the real conversation or the real question for me that I'm more intrigued in is, how many games they need him to win for however long he's out there. Say it's 8 games, 10 games. How many of those games they need to win for then Deshaun Watson to take over and hopefully get them to the playoffs, which I think would be around maybe a little bit more. I would say a little bit more than 9 wins, which is what Chris Canty sort of projected for a whole season of Jacoby Brissett. I'd say you have to at least get to 10. Maybe you could sneak it with 9. We saw the Steelers kind of do that last year with a record with less than 10 wins. So it can be done, but obviously the AFC is pretty loaded. So that's kind of where my head's at with this conversation.
Yeah, and, Spencer, you bring up a good point there, too, with the AFC getting more and more loaded. And, to that point, I'll even say, look at last year what you had with Baker Mayfield as a quarterback, obviously dealing with the injuries, but at the same time, not necessarily that superstar, quarterback play that you come to it, that, you're expecting at least with the rest of this offense. But, you look at Jacoby Brissett, if you get competent quarterback play, last year you got 8 to 9 wins with whatever the hell you want to call that season from Baker Mayfield. And so, you insert somebody who gives you just solid quarterback play. And I think that all of a sudden you're looking at the rest of that talent on the offense really kind of carrying the rest of that.
Yeah, I think another element of this, Mac, and this is something that we've obviously talked about at 92.3 quite a bit, is just how is Kevin Stefanski going to run this offense? Because I think when you bring in Deshaun Watson, your offense is going to be different than what it was with Baker Mayfield. Same thing, it's going to be different than if you have Jacoby Brissett out there for an extended period of time. And yeah, like I trust Jacoby Brissett to sort of be that hold down the fort type guy in the absence of Deshaun Watson, however long that is, as we wait for an answer to that question. But I think for sure, like, you then have to think about the next part of that conversation is how is Kevin Stefanski going to run this offense? We've been critical of him at times in his inability to rely on the run game when maybe we think he should in certain situations. When you have a guy like Nick Chubb plus Kareem Hunt right behind him, they obviously added to that running back room during the draft with Jerome Ford. They have Dearness Johnson in that room as well. So you have such a stacked group there. It's like you got to count on those guys sometimes more than maybe he did. So that's the next part of that question is like, yeah, Jacoby Brissett, I think he can do a fine job kind of managing things, not necessarily losing you games, but maybe you lose some games because he can't take you to that next level because that's just not who he is. But how does Kevin Stefanski kind of manage those games as a head coach with him out there? And that could be the difference between, to Chris Canty's point, 8, 9, 10 wins with Jacoby Brissett versus, 5, 6.
Yeah, and, Spencer, starting week 1, you got to go ahead and circle in, what that week 1 matchup is. Now, Baker Mayfield, he is out of Cleveland. He is in Carolina. And yesterday, he had his first press conference with the Carolina Panthers, and he spoke on the matchup that is upcoming, obviously week 1, against the Cleveland Browns with the Carolina Panthers.
No animosity towards Cleveland. It's a good football town that, gave me the first 4 years of my career, and thankful for those trials and tribulations, all the challenges, a lot to learn from and look back on and reflect, but just really focused on right now and being a Carolina Panther and, pumped up to do so.
Yeah, and Spencer, when it comes to Baker Mayfield, obviously you had the tumultuous offseason and everything like that going on with Cleveland. Now in Carolina, doesn't have the animosity, but when it comes to week 1, especially against the Cleveland Browns, this is what he had to say regarding the matchup coming in week 1.
Anytime you get to put the pads on, for the first time, it's live fire. It's always a great time. Obviously, it's going to be a special one. It's going to be a home game and playing against a former team. A similar situation of what I've gone through in the past when transferring from college to college. So got to handle it the best way possible. And, my job is to put our team in the best position to win. And however I can help do that, that's what I'm going to do.
So now with both sides kind of looking at, the Browns moving on, Baker Mayfield on to Carolina, do you think it adds a little bit more pressure on both sides when it comes to Baker going to Carolina, playing against his former team in week 1, and for the Browns pressure to kind of show that, hey, you know what, we're fine with Jacoby Brissett and we're fine with the roster that we have?
I definitely think there's pressure on both sides. For the Browns, I think it's a conversation in whether it's Jacoby Brissett or not, which I'm assuming at this point most of us assume it is going to be Jacoby Brissett week 1. I think for them it's that battle of like, well, hey, if we lose this game, we know what people are going to say, right? Like there's going to be a lot of criticism from outside the building. And I know Kevin Stefanski sort of runs a tight ship. He preaches that we keep things that are external. We don't let that affect us in the locker room. I get that. But they're going to hear that stuff. Naturally, players are going to hear that stuff. And if you start to hear, I also think it could be divisive for the fan base, which is already pretty divisive as is over the Deshaun Watson situation as a whole. So, yeah, I think there's an element of that there where you lose that first game, a lot of questions asked about why you moved on from Baker Mayfield. On the flip side, I don't know if for Carolina there's like this pressure. The pressure for Carolina as a whole, I think, comes from Matt Rule's on the hot seat. We all know that. And he has to win now if he wants to save his job. So I think there's that pressure. I think the pressure that's on the Panthers for that game is solely just about Baker Mayfield, because we know how this guy is. We've spent enough time with him the last 4 years to know he's been very much preaches that chip on your shoulder mentality. It's almost his motto at this point where, anything he perceives as a slight, he tries to use that as motivation. So for him, he's going to have added pressure on himself, I'm sure, because that's what he does. Colin Cowherd calls him out. He internalizes that and uses it as pressure in a game to try to rise to the occasion and play a little bit better football. I think the same thing is going to apply here. That's just who Baker is. Sometimes that's backfired. Sometimes it's worked. I guess if you're a Browns fan, maybe you're a little nervous that it's the situation this time around where it works in his favor and he comes out and plays well under that pressure. But yeah, I think for Baker, there's pressure. I think for the Browns, there's pressure, even though they won't tell you that. It's a week 1 game. At the end of the day, it may not make or break their playoff chances. But especially piggybacking off the last conversation we had, Mac, if you're trying to think about wins that you need to have with Jacoby Brissett, that week 1 game is a big one if you're trying to steal some wins with Jacoby Brissett before Deshaun Watson gets out there.
Yeah, and Spencer, at this point, I think you mentioned it there with Baker Mayfield. He's got enough chips on his shoulder that he might as well call himself a 7-11. But Spencer, the one thing that I will say, to piggyback off that is that now the Browns have that extra cap space, and that's led people to speculate. Who could the Browns possibly add? And all of a sudden, report earlier today from Tyler Dragon saying the Browns are another team that's interested in Ndamukong Suh, defensive tackle. Obviously, Browns have a hole there, so that makes some logical sense. But then we go ahead. We have conflicting reports from Brad Stainbrook of the OBR, who said the Browns have not been in contact with Ndamukong Suh this week. There have been prior interest, although we don't know how much interest there actually was or how strong that interest was. And then Stainbrook also followed that up with another tweet here saying that the Browns are not in the mix for Ndamukong Suh, considering it unlikely, that the team will sign the defensive tackle. And Mary Kay Cabot also agreed with that, saying that there are several times that she has written that the Browns are not interested in Ndamukong Suh. So, Spencer, to tie this together at this point, I know that we've had conflicting reports here clearly, although I'm leaning towards the fact that the Browns aren't interested in this. Do you think that this is more legitimate, or do you think that this is, more so Ndamukong Suh's camp trying to, get more money out of the, Minnesota Vikings and, Las Vegas Raiders at this point?
First of all, I love that Mary Kay Cabot tweet where she ends it with just nothing's changed. She knows, she knows the answer and you don't. It was pretty funny. But no, I think, I believe some of the reports from Brad. He's usually pretty in tune with this stuff where, maybe there was some interest earlier in the offseason, they had some conversations. But when push comes to shove, you got Mary Kay disputing something. You got Brad kind of downplaying it, saying yeah, it's unlikely it happens. There might have been some conversations earlier. I'm going to believe that there was maybe some interest there, but that it just never really came to fruition. So I'm not going to write it off as just his camp trying to drum up interest. Maybe that's part of it. But I think there probably was maybe at least a conversation had about maybe we could bring this guy in. But yeah, I think at this point, based on what both Brad and Mary Kay are saying, it seems like it would be a shock to anybody in the know if Ndamukong Suh ended up with Cleveland Browns.
Spencer German of 92.3 The Fan and I are going to take a timeout. When we come back, the latest on Deshaun Watson and the wait for Watson. We'll get into that coming up next here on Sports4CLE.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Earlier today, we got a voicemail, and of course, a voicemail of truth and reason. Always appreciate all of your voicemails. And this caller had this to ask about the process of Judge Sue Robinson's ruling on Deshaun Watson's suspension.
Yeah, I'm a fellow Cleveland Browns lover. I think this whole Deshaun Watson thing is getting a little ridiculous. I can't wait until it's over. They keep saying he's going to get a year, 6 to 8. Now they're saying 4 to 6. It's getting really confusing, especially when Tony Rizzo from ESPN 850 was talking about it. I'm very, very just confused. I just want, and here's my thing. Why is it taking so long to, I know it's a legal process, but why 2 weeks? Why do we have to wait 2 weeks to find out about the decision or anything like that? And then my other thing is, what's the point of having a judge if she suspends him and Roger Goodell says, okay, no, I don't like that suspension, we're going to give him a year? It makes no sense. I just want to hear your thoughts. Go Browns.
So to that second point there at the end regarding Roger Goodell, I tend to agree when it comes to Roger Goodell overruling, and that's why, because this is that first major case that Judge Sue Robinson will be ruling on. I think that they're taking their time regarding all of this. But as for the legal process of this, Pro Football Talk has an article up, and Mike Florio also is a lawyer as well. He had this in his article saying that Judge Robinson will digest the documents and eventually make a decision. It will be important for her to write a clear and understandable ruling. And he also states in there that the document, if published, as it should be, will be scrutinized and analyzed and possibly criticized. And he has kind of circled that week of July 25th as that process and as that time to go ahead and expect some kind of a ruling. The reasoning why we get into this, and as I bring in Spencer German of 92.3 The Fan, the reason why we're getting into this is because of how monumental this is of a decision. And on top of it, you just have the cases that were submitted yesterday. So at this point, Sue Robinson's just now looking over all of the final facts that are in front of her. So it makes sense for her to take her time to go ahead and give her ruling.
Yeah, I think for her, I mean, being a former federal judge, she understands the importance of precedent in the legal system, right? So this being the first case as the independent arbiter for both the NFLPA and the NFL, this is going to establish precedent for how she rules on cases in the future, how the NFL, what kind of leeway the NFL has in issuing suspensions, what kind of power the NFLPA has in trying to make those suspensions potentially lesser as they back the players, obviously. So I think it's fine that she's taking her time, as much as I agree with the caller there. And I'm sure you as well, Mac, that having this we've talked this conversation in circles at this point, right? I try every time I host on 92.3 The Fan, I try to find a new angle to this. What's the angle that no one's talked about? We've covered them all. There's nothing. There is literally nothing left for us to get into. So it's literally just a waiting game at this point. So I get the exhaustion of it all. But we gotta obviously respect the process. I also think for Browns fans, it's probably better that Sue Robinson does take her time to vet these things out, get these briefings, and kind of look them over before she decides in terms of Deshaun playing, rather than just make a snap decision and be like, yeah, this is it. This is what I'm ruling. So I think that probably plays into Deshaun Watson's favor a little bit, plays in the Browns' hands a little bit, which is good news for Cleveland fans, of course. But yeah, I think this is just kind of par for the course with especially the first time that she's ruling on this. I also think to kind of just go off the second part of that question there, I understand where people are looking at, Roger Goodell could just supersede her eventually. But this is an important element that's been talked about by Mike Florio, as you brought up. Like, the NFL doesn't want to undermine this process either. I mean, this was collectively bargained. So that's another element that they've talked about maybe benefiting Deshaun Watson, that they may just take whatever suspension she dishes out because, hey, this is what we decided, right? And Roger Goodell doesn't want to be the one to rule on this and have that fall into his lap because, heck, he's dealt with that way too many times where he's had to get the backlash on the other end for, whatever suspension he's handed out to players. I think that's part of why they instituted Sue Robinson, was getting that out of his hands.
Yeah, and from looking at it on the Watson side, because again, we've seen over the last couple of weeks, it seems like it's gone from the NFL saying we're not going to take anything less from a year. Now it's all of a sudden becoming, it's swinging more towards at least the momentum in favor of Watson. And this tweet from Josina Anderson, where she took an excerpt from the NFL conduct policy, saying that everyone who is part of the league, and again, that's bold, underlined, everyone who is part of the league must refrain from conduct detrimental to the integrity of public confidence in the NFL. That includes owners, coaches, players, other team employees, game officials, and so on and so forth. And so with that being said, that's why you're seeing a lot of people point towards the Robert Kraft incident, as well as the fact that, Daniel Snyder is still probably filming the I'm on a Boat music video round 2 right now at this point. So, the fact that he's been dodging Congress. So at this point, I think that that's something that if you're Sue Robinson and just taking the facts, you have to take that into account with previous precedents being taken with the ownership that, as the NFL has said, is held to a quote-unquote higher standard.
Yeah, and again, I think there's been some conversations about that argument being made by Deshaun Watson's team and the NFLPA. I think it's a pretty sound argument. I understand why people don't like when you point the finger and say, well, what about this? And that doesn't always work in your favor. But I think to point to, in this instance, a conduct policy that's supposed to be all-encompassing for players, coaches, owners, everybody, and you're enforcing it different ways for different players, I think there's a valid case there that you're not, there's not equality in the way that this is enforced among everybody. So I think it's pretty reasonable why Deshaun Watson and his team pointed to that and brought that up. No matter how you feel about what he did or where you stand on that side of the conversation, I think him bringing up that point is fair because these owners have done nefarious things themselves that we've all criticized, and they get slap on the wrist for it. So I think that's certainly the case here. I think that's part of the reason why she mentioned that excerpt and why she pointed to it. I know she did mention the one word in there that kind of can be interpreted differently and has kind of the vague, broad meaning is irresponsible. And that's the one I keep going back to of why I think Deshaun Watson is getting some sort of suspension, because you can take certain language from the personal conduct policy and say okay, he did something that feels irresponsible, or did he make the league look bad? That's another element of the personal conduct policy. What he did, his behavior could be construed as he certainly didn't paint the league in a good light. So maybe that's where she falls back on to give out a punishment. But yeah, the 1 year plus that we've seen, I think that argument's kind of gone out the window, both based on reports we've heard about the lack of hard evidence proving that there was forced, anything was forced, anything was coerced, yada, 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 from I know Mike Florio pointed that out, but also just from the fact that, you're looking at the owners and saying, you don't enforce this thing equally. So why should it be enforced? Why should we throw the book at Deshaun Watson?
Now, Deshaun Watson did also post on his Instagram that he posted from the Browns facility, that Browns hat. He is in Berea, and it looks like he's ready for training camp. So it seems like the quarterback, seems like the signal caller seems ready to go for training camp coming up here in a couple weeks there, Spencer.
You got to love the cryptic posts on social media in July, Mac. Does it get any better than this? You got guys posting stuff about, hinting at whether or not they're going to show up to training camp. You got guys taking pictures at the facility. Everyone reads into it. I'm sure everyone was looking at that picture thinking like, oh, Deshaun knows he's not getting suspended for the whole year. He's already you got to love the crypticness, and you got to love the trying to interpret social media posts. It's the gift that keeps on giving this time of year.
Oh, yeah, and the gift that keeps on giving is Spencer German, and we'll have more from him coming up next, as well as talking about a streak that the Browns will be breaking come week 1, as well as some ratings from one ESPN analyst. Again, Mac Robinson here on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. And Cleveland Browns, obviously heading into this year, still with Kevin Stefanski at the helm. And it looks like Kevin Stefanski is actually going to be breaking some history here for the Cleveland Browns, as Anthony Reinhardt said that the last time that each of these teams brought back their head coach and coordinators for week 1 for the last 3 seasons, and the LA Rams, 1990, Cleveland Browns, second longest streak since 1993, where they had their head coach and coordinators back for 3 straight seasons. So in order to talk about that, we bring in Spencer German of 92.3 The Fan. And Spencer, with that being said, despite bringing back Kevin Stefanski, despite bringing back Joe Woods and Alex Van Pelt, at this point, do you think that with the new quarterback and system on offense, do you think that that almost negates that a little bit on offense, especially with the new quarterback and new type of system there?
I don't know if it negates it. Listen, it's no easy for this franchise and everything that they've gone through, and just the 2 decades worth of just misery that they put fans through and embarrassment in a lot of ways. And they've always been the butt of the joke and just a carousel of coaches coming through. Like, I think it's something to certainly, it's nothing to not be I guess like satisfied with. Like, it's exciting, I think, for Browns fans to finally see that semblance of stability. There's finally some continuity. And I always argue, like, you can't just have continuity for continuity's sake. If your team's not good, you can't just keep bringing guys back. But certainly with under Kevin Stefanski and Joe Woods and Alex Van Pelt, there's been some success. We know about the playoff run a couple years ago and when they beat the Steelers. So I think it's nice that we can finally look at the Browns and point to an organization that is establishing something, building something, that they're able to keep their coordinators here. Now that'll change if they go and have success this year with Deshaun Watson, because obviously you'll start to lose some of those guys. Joe Woods, potentially Alex Van Pelt, they'll get head coaching jobs. But I think it is a nice thing for the Browns to kind of hang their hat on. And no, I wouldn't say it negates it just because you have a new quarterback. If anything, I think them making that move, being aggressive to add, certainly speaks to the fact that they want to that they want more. Like, they want to be better. They want to be even more fulfilling at their positions, in their positions, and not, just rest on their laurels and maybe risk losing their jobs and ending up like so many Browns coordinators and coaches of years past. They're trying to go all in, and I think that certainly deserves some applause.
Well, and Spencer, the other side of that, too, is that you have Joe Woods on the other side. You have most of your starters returning back for 2022. So with that being said, do you have some higher expectations, or at least when it comes to this defense coming together early on in the season?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think we talked a lot last year leading up to the season. Most people in the media did, just about how there was a lot of expectations for this defense. They certainly had to build off of the season before, where they had some issues, especially in the secondary. But we also knew there was going to be some growing pains. There was a lot of new faces. John Johnson III, most notably in that group. You bring in Greg Newsome. So you had some guys that kind of had to fit in. Obviously, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was a rookie last year who made some noise. So there was a lot of moving parts. But I think, especially because of down the stretch of the season last year, we saw this group get better under Joe Woods. I mean, I can recall early on in the season last year, Mac, a time where fans were ready to line up with their torches and pitchforks in Berea and run Joe Woods out of town because his defense just wasn't getting the job done on a weekly basis. And then by the season's end, we were talking about how the defense was the reason the Browns were even in games, like holding Aaron Rodgers to what they held him to in that Packers game on Christmas Day. And that was obviously a bad performance by Baker Mayfield that cost him in that one. So, yeah, I mean, I think the expectations are certainly higher. It's a group that knows each other better now, has the experience of playing together, has a year under their belt with some new pieces sprinkled in for sure. But I think there's certainly a lot of expectations for Joe Woods' group in this next season, year 3.
Now, ESPN's Mike Clay, obviously, throughout the offseason, has his ratings for every team's positional groups and has the Cleveland Browns in here, coming just below just above the Minnesota Vikings, just below the Minnesota Vikings. Sorry, has them just below the Minnesota Vikings. I think that they're expecting a little bit of missed time there from Deshaun Watson, but you can see a couple of the weaknesses there on the team, obviously circling that interior defensive line and the wide receiver group. Spencer, I know that it's not a proven wide receiver group at this point when it comes to the Cleveland Browns, but I got to think that with Amari Cooper and obviously Donovan Peoples-Jones going into year 3, I don't think that it's as bad as some people are kind of giving the bill for at this point.
I would agree. I mean, I think there's certainly some potential there. What makes me a little bit nervous about this group, Mac, is just you don't have a lot of veteran experience in that room other than Amari Cooper. And I understand that this regime, Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, they have a lot of confidence clearly in the young guys in that room. Donovan Peoples-Jones coming out this year. They've certainly seen him progress, and I think they're expecting even bigger things from him. Clearly, they think pretty highly of David Njoku as a tight end. I know that's not the wide receiver room, but they give him that big extension, so they think he's going to be doing a little bit more. And obviously, you draft David Bell for a reason. Plus, you have Anthony Schwartz sprinkled in, another Andrew Berry draft pick that they, I think, expect to make some leaps here this season. So they're putting a lot of stock in the fact that they've drafted well and that they believe that they have talent behind Amari Cooper as the lone kind of veteran of this group to carry this team and do some nice things offensively. Again, I'm a little hesitant, but I'm not so cold on this group that I think like they're going to be trash. I don't think they're going to be bad, especially if you have Deshaun Watson out there. I think he's the type of quarterback that makes those guys better, which is what you want in a quarterback. It's what the Browns have lacked in a quarterback for so long. So, yeah, I still have confidence in this group. I'm a little weary of it. I wish there was a guy out there that I could really hone in on and say, man, I wish I could go get that guy and add him to the mix here. But maybe we get that during training camp. We'll see. But, yeah, I think that maybe it's being slept on a little bit, especially if guys like David Bell and Donovan Peoples-Jones really do break out as this Browns regime is expecting.
Spencer German and I are going to take a timeout. When we come back, what Brown star might have been disrespected by a national media outlet? We'll have that for you coming up next right here on Sports4CLE.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Now, we saw earlier in the week Myles Garrett getting some run with the Cavs Summer League, but Bleacher Report put out this article: most dominant player at every position. At edge rusher, they have T.J. Watt at defensive end there, or at edge rusher, from the Pittsburgh Steelers. But they had honorable mention from Myles Garrett, saying Garrett is coming off back-to-back All-Pro campaigns, but he's one short of Watt and doesn't have a recent Defensive Player of the Year honor on his resume. I'm going to go ahead and disagree with that a little bit. Not disagree with the accolades, but disagree with the talent opposite of him in surrounding him on the rest of that defense. Again, Myles Garrett's been kind of going through different regimes, or at least different groups of players that have been coming in. Now this year, obviously, getting more starters. But to talk about that, we bring in Spencer German from 92.3 The Fan. And, you know, Spencer, I got to say, I know that T.J. Watt, extremely talented player. I'm not disrespecting him. But, you know, again, for Myles Garrett, it feels like, you know, the situation surrounding Myles at this point hasn't quite been to what T.J. Watt has had at this point.
I see what you're saying. I'm going to push back a little bit in that. Listen, here's the thing, and this is not begrudging Myles Garrett at all, because I think the world of Myles Garrett as a player. I think he's obviously uber talented. If he's not better than T.J. Watt from a skill set standpoint, it's like 1A and 1B, right? Like, those two guys clearly deserve to be in this conversation in general, just because they're both so dominant at their respective positions. But I think the accolades do matter here, Mac. Like, you go out and win a Defensive Player of the Year, you go out and tie the single season sack record. Mind you, he did it in T.J. Watt. He did it in less games than what the regular season even allowed. He did it in 15 games. So if he plays in those other 2 games, maybe he even breaks it. Like, of course, that stuff is going to put you a cut above the rest of the competition. Meanwhile, with Myles Garrett, like, yeah, he's had some injury issues over the years. I know he played in every game last year, and that's a great step for him. He had his highest sack numbers last year when he did. So I think if he continues on the trajectory he's been on, if he can stay healthy next year and he can get in that conversation, maybe win a Defensive Player of the Year, I would be willing to put him past T.J. Watt. But I think at this point, Watt has the accolades, Watt has the numbers, and just the ridiculousness of what he's been able to do in his career, even in less games than some other players, where I think he certainly warrants the honor. And again, it's nothing against Myles Garrett. I said it off the rip here, like 1A and 1B, but I think I understand why T.J. Watt gets that edge just slightly.
Don't you try to cover your bases. Come on now. Come on. I know what you're trying to do. I mean, Spence, when it comes to the Steelers, though, this year, and with T.J. Watt, you know, do you think that, you know, there's going to be more pressure put on him because of the fact that you have, you know, Kenny Pickett leading the offense at this point? Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky, again, we don't know at this point. You know, do you think that there's more expectations put on that defense, especially, you know, with them losing other pieces?
Oh, 100%. We know, like, that Steelers team this year is kind of, I mean, obviously they had Ben Roethlisberger, so it's hard to say like this is the same as those teams. But the Steelers have always been known as a defensive franchise, right? That's their bread and butter. They build through their defense. They stack that side of the ball, and then they hope to kind of fill in the cracks on offense and find that franchise quarterback. They got fortunate where they hit on Ben Roethlisberger and have had the success they've had over the last decade plus now with him. Obviously, he rides off into the sunset. So they're hoping for that again with Kenny Pickett. I know the conversation isn't specifically about what we think of him, but knowing, you know, it's a rookie quarterback and he could be maybe thrown into the fire there. There's going to be some growing pains. There could be a situation where they miss on him completely and he's not the next guy. We know that defense is going to carry that group. It's the reason why I think they still, in some people's eyes, can't be written off in this division. I would dispute that, but I understand why people are feeling that way, because when you have a defense that good, you have a great defensive mind in Mike Tomlin, for sure you're going to garner some conversation and some respect. But yeah, that defensive group's going to have to carry that group, most notably TJ Watt. So there's certainly a lot more pressure on him to get to dominate in games in order to give the Steelers a chance to have any success in the division, in the NFL this year, and maybe even be a playoff team. If they're going to do that, it's going to be about him for sure.
Spencer German from 92.3 The Fan. You can hear him live tonight from 7 p.m. until midnight. Tweet at him at Spencito_, and make sure you go ahead and let him know how much he loves TJ Watt. But Spencer, thank you so much for joining me, my friend. Always appreciate the time.
No doubt, Mac. I'm glad we get to do this all again in a couple hours from now. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I'll see you at the station, my friend. Again, Spencer German, make sure you give him a follow. Make sure you tune in tonight. But coming up next, Chris Easterling of the Akron Beacon Journal. Going to be talking about training camp coming up for the Cleveland Browns. Joining me next right here on Sports4CLE.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Now, training camp coming up for the Cleveland Browns in Berea, and Dog Pound Daily has their 3 defensive positions to watch at Browns training camp as well. And they have, to start out here, who will be the middle linebacker? Last year, Anthony Walker was the primary middle linebacker. You still have Jacob Phillips, who went down with injuries leading into the season last year. He could be somebody who gets more snaps. Then at cornerback, you've got Greg Newsome, Martin Emerson, obviously Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams, A.J. Green. A lot of interesting players on that depth chart. And then at defensive tackle, obviously a major need where you have Perion Winfrey selected in round 4, Jordan Elliott in 2020 selected in round 3, Tommy Togiai selected in round 4 last year, and then Taven Bryan, who was picked up in free agency. So to break all of these battles down, we bring in Chris Easterling of the Akron Beacon Journal. And Chris, 1, thank you very much for joining me, my friend. Appreciate the time. And 2, when it comes to training camp, of these battles and otherwise, what are you really looking forward to when it comes to these training camp battles?
I'm especially looking for. I think the defensive tackle spot is something that's going to be really interesting, just because I think it's such a critical piece of what this defense really can do because, they were all right against the run last year, but they certainly weren't good enough that I think that this defense needs to be. And, it was an area that they didn't really address much. And, they brought Perion Winfrey in through the draft. They obviously acquired Tavon Bryant, but they need production there because the edges of that defense is solid. Defensive line is solid with Clowney and Garrett, but those two interior spots are going to be so big for what that whole defense can do, especially against the run.
Well, and on top of that, too, it's almost like cause and effect a little bit here because, like you mentioned with the defensive tackle spots, you also still have that question with the middle linebacker spot between Anthony Walker, who came over from the Colts last offseason, going into this year now in his second year with Cleveland. How do you think that, the lack of additions or, lack of major additions, I should say, at the defensive tackle spots, how do you think that affects that middle linebacker spot in the middle of that defense?
Well, I mean, you always hear defensive coaches talking about how, the linebackers play off the defensive linemen because, they keep them clean from blockers and what a Jordan Elliott or a Brian or, whomever maybe, and, even a Clowney if they slide him inside on some sets, what they can do, the more they can kind of occupy blockers, more frees up an Anthony Walker, a Jacob Phillips, Sione Takitaki, whomever you may talk about at that linebacker spot. It's critical. I mean, it really is, it's cliche, but it's true. It's such every key to every cog in the machine has to work for this thing to work at its peak potential, and for this defense to work, it needs those defensive tackles up the middle, the defensive tackles, and then those interior linebacker guys to play well this year, and again to make that defense what they need it to be, especially early on, because we don't know how long the offense is going to be without Deshaun Watson due to the suspension, so. I imagine the defense is going to be asked to carry a heavier load, and that, again, it goes, that defensive tackles, linebackers, all, making big plays.
Yeah, and, Chris, the other side of this as well, they mentioned the cornerback depth chart there. It feels like that cornerback group is kind of loaded a little bit this year after almost finding gold when it comes to Greedy Williams coming back off of injury and then adding in somebody like Martin Emerson who doesn't necessarily have to play right away. What are your thoughts on that cornerback group, and especially for somebody like Martin Emerson to kind of come in and, despite being the first pick taken by the Cleveland Browns, not necessarily having to play right away?
You mentioned the very talented room, but I don't think there's any room that hinges more on good health than that cornerback room, because you think, we saw Denzel Ward at the end of mini camp, walk off the field with the trainer. Now they said no structural damage. They felt confident he'd be back, by training camps, but there is a history with him. Greedy Williams, another one you mentioned, who's, since he came out of LSU, has been battling injury. But if they can stay healthy, it really shapes up as a nice room, because what it allows you to do is you can put Williams on the opposite side of Ward at the outside. You can slide Greg Newsome in to play the slot position where Troy Hill was last year. And it allows a Martin Emerson to grow and learn and not be forced to play a high level of important snaps. Not that he won't play, but you want to kind of bring him along. You don't want to just kind of like the bird pushing him out of the nest and see if they can fly. You want him to kind of develop and get his feet wet. But if a Williams or Denzel or even Greg Newsome, who did miss a couple of games last year, if you got some injuries there, I mean, it just kind of accelerates things for Emerson, and a third round rookie, you're hoping for the best, but it's still a lot to ask.
Now, we saw on CBSSports.com, they put out their top 30 players over 30. And one name that I feel like kind of goes by the wayside a little bit because he doesn't play the sexy position is Joel Bitonio, coming in at number 23, saying that he hasn't just modeled durability in Cleveland, starting every game for 5 straight seasons, but he's also been a catalyst for the Browns' relentless rushing attack for Nick Chubb's stardom there. When it comes to the Browns offensive line and Joel Bitonio, he just seems like the engine that doesn't stop running when it comes to this team. And despite the fact that, it's not a sexy position, he's one of the oldest players on this roster. So for Joel Bitonio, it really seems like he's been that kind of rock for this team.
It's almost funny because, you see him 30, it seems like he was just drafted yesterday, but really you look back, you got to go. He was a Ray Farmer selection all the way back in 2014. It's just amazing the durability and the production they've gotten out of him. He's quite honestly, you can make the argument that after Joe Thomas, he might be the best pick. Well, let me step back. After Joe Thomas and Myles Garrett, he may be one of the top 3 to 5 picks since this team's come back in 1999. He's just been incredible for this team, and like you say, a rock for him. And you sort of take those guys for granted, and until they're not there. And I know for this season they need him to be there, and I'm sure we're going to talk about his cohort at the other side of the other guard plus spot, but. Two guys that, really have been anchors for this offensive line group for a few years.
Yeah, and especially a shining star in that 2014 draft, and really redeems the fact that they selected Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel in round 1. You kind of forget that a little bit at this point. But you don't. not forgiven, but you know what? It helps me forget that, at least. Put that in the back of my mind. But, Chris, you mentioned it. ESPN.com had their top 10 interior offensive linemen. Joel Bitonio coming in at number 5 for them. Out of the lowest ranking out of the top 10, highest ranking number 1, and his other guard mate there on the offensive line, Wyatt Teller, coming in at number 9, highest ranked number 4 for him as well. And them saying about Bitonio, rare combination of quickness and pullability. And when it comes to Wyatt Teller, they love the attitude and physicality. When it comes to this duo as a group, how important do you think that it is for the offense as a whole to be able to have both of these guys not only on your roster but also extended and as that kind of foundation for this team going forward?
Critical, absolutely critical. That's a group that's it's so important to have continuity, so important to have kind of cohesion, that sort of thing. Insert whatever coaching catchphrase you want to put on there, but those two guys, they've just been so important in the last 2 or 3 years together, and it's why that offensive line is one of the best in the NFL when it's healthy. If they can get help on the outside with a healthy Jack Conklin, a healthy Jed Wills, I really think it has a chance to be at the top of the league in terms of groups. You saw it 2 years ago. With what they did in 2020, and I think again with what they're going to need to do early on in the season, at least with the running game, it's to have those two back and knowing you sort of know what each other is going to do. I think that's just massive for this offense.
Chris Easterling and I are going to take a timeout. When we come back, we're going to talk about expectations for the Browns' weaponry as well as what Browns roster holes still need to be filled. Again, we'll take a timeout when we come back on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery, partners in education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Now, Cleveland Browns obviously have Deshaun Watson at quarterback, but when it comes to the weapons that he's throwing to, obviously added in some new wide receivers, but extended tight end David Njoku. And in order to talk about the tight end room specifically, let's bring in Chris Easterling of the Akron Beacon Journal. And Chris, you had a great piece about the tight end room. And, when it comes to, this tight end group specifically, losing Austin Hooper, you extend David Njoku, you still have Harrison Bryant, who has a larger role. What do you think are fair expectations for that group specifically?
That they take a step forward, that you start to, with especially with the David Njoku, you start to see the best version of himself. You start to see consistency out of him. I think that's the biggest thing with Njoku is just consistency in catching the ball, consistency in his route running, those sorts of things, because you're paying him to be an integral part of this offense. And it's time, he's going into the 6th year, with this team. So I realize he was drafted incredibly young coming out of Miami, but at the same time, it's been 5 years, 6 years now since he was in college. So I think it's sort of the sort of time for him to take a step forward. With Bryant, I think it's just, continue the development. And more than anything, I think it's going to be a higher workload with him because, you look at his first 2 years, he's right around the mid-20s in catches, mid to low 20s in catches, so you're going to see more production out of him. I think he provides good things in the run game as a blocker, and it's just, again, like with Njoku, it's just taking the next step and becoming, each year, putting another year of better over what you were a year ago.
Well, and Chris, the other aspect of this too, when I look at this entire situation, you see Deshaun Watson coming in. We don't know how many games he's going to play. Again, we're still waiting on that from Judge Sue Robinson. But at the same time, you look back at 2019, and he made 33-year-old blocking tight end Darren Fells into a red zone threat that everybody was scared of. So, when it comes to adding in Deshaun Watson at quarterback, how do you think that he affects that tight end room specifically?
Well, I think he's certainly a guy that was going to get. I think, to use another comparison, look what Lamar Jackson uses with Mark Andrews. I think, I think it's more than anything. I think it's just another weapon because, when you look at the offensive skill positions outside of the running back room, you have a lot of questions, and you're looking for some guys to really elevate themselves to become. We think Amari Cooper is going to be the top target on the team, but I think Njoku and Bryant can create some matchup issues that can really, open things up for not just themselves, but for the offense in the whole. And I think that's where, the combination of Deshaun Watson and the tight end room are really going to come into play.
Now, Bleacher Report, they had their roster holes that the Browns must fill before training camp. And I thought it was interesting because you have the wide receiver group, obviously a lot of unproven talent in there. Donovan Peoples-Jones looking to, really have that breakout campaign this season. Then they have the defensive tackles, which, again, like we discussed, there's a lot of question marks there. They really didn't, make a major addition in that room. But the one that really caught my eye was, lastly, offensive tackle. I know Jack Conklin was dealing with injuries at that point, and you have Chris Hubbard coming back as a swing tackle. James Hudson, who you selected last year, he was in the mix with playing time. When it comes to, these holes specifically, I feel like offensive tackle doesn't necessarily fit as well as the other two.
I think it's an area where I mean, we saw it a year ago in that Pittsburgh game. Think about, week 17 when they played that Monday nighter in Pittsburgh, and the island that James Hudson was left on trying to block T.J. Watt. Now, granted, he's blocking T.J. Watt in the time, but it's an area where I think there is legitimate concern that what happens again. Jack Conklin's shown injury issues. Jed Wills again last year had the ankle injury he battled all year. I think it's an area where Hubbard and Hudson are quality, have a chance to be quality, pieces. Hubbard in particular, but they're nowhere near. I mean, I don't think you feel. I think you still hold your breath even when they're in there. So it's always, that's a very important position on the offensive line. So finding some quality depth, it never hurts to have more depth at that position, especially when you have guys who have shown the tendency to occasionally get injured.
Now, I could be wrong. I think Eric Fisher is still out there, the offensive tackle. So I know that previously you've covered the Colts before. What are your thoughts on Fisher, and do you think that he's somebody that Andrew Berry should be calling about?
I mean, you take a swing, I guess. I mean, it's one of those things that, I think they're happy right now. I don't think they're necessarily out looking, for specifics. But if the opportunity, presents itself and it costs, it makes sense cost-wise, I mean, you take a swing at whatever. I mean, that's certainly an opportunity.
See, and this is why we love having Chris Easterling join us from the Akron Beacon Journal, throwing curveballs at him, and I appreciate the answers right away. Chris, thank you so much for joining me, my friend. Appreciate the time. Let's do it again soon.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right, Chris Easterling of the Akron Beacon Journal joining me again. This has been Sports4CLE. Coming up on tomorrow's show, Quincy Carrier, YouTube personality, he's going to be joining me, as well as Casey Kinnaman of Dog Pound Daily as well. So you're going to want to make sure you stay tuned for that at 4 p.m. tomorrow. And I'm Mac Robinson. I'm in with you tomorrow, again, right here on Sports4CLE.